panel that is going to address the topic of infrastructure. We have dealt with infrastructure, especially during the first day, and today we're going to have specialists coming from all over Latin America. We have Jesaias, who is the vice president of Abranet, that is Brazilian Association of Internet, and he lives in Amazonas. Where do you live? In Manaus. So he has traveled a long way to come all the way to Argentina. Thank you, round of applause for Jesaias. Our second panelist is Cesar Diaz, coming from LACNIC, leading telecommunication affairs of LACNIC. Third panelist, Lisania Contelca, Executive Secretary from Contelca, from the Dominican Republic. Then, Nico Pascual, Superintendent of Planning and Regulation of Anatel. Pablo Garcia cannot join us because he's sick. However, we have Pana Mendez, who is the Executive Secretary of ASIET, and then we have Diego Molano Vega, who's the International Consultant on Transformation of Digital Governments. He was our host in Bogota. Diego was our moderator and host in Bogota. It's a pleasure to see you once again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. We are listening to both audios. I hear you perfectly well. I hear you perfectly well. Please, you need to close the YouTube tab. Otherwise, if you have opened the browser with a tab, you click on YouTube, that needs to be closed.
Es que yo tenía YouTube.
Yeah, great. It's better because I close YouTube. Yeah, YouTube has a delay because of streaming. Thank you, Diego, for always being with us. He was the host in 2012 when he was presiding the ICTs of Colombia. And at that time, he has always taken part in projects. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming. And I would like to thank all the panelists for being here. Diego, first, yours. Thank you very much. Jesaias is here right beside me. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. The only panelist here is Jesaias that is here with us in the room. Good. We're going to be discussing these infrastructure topics, and we have been addressing this throughout a lifetime, for decades. And before delving into this topic, I would like our panelists to introduce themselves. They can tell us of what they do, and they can tell us a secret that so far has not been revealed. Just to set a high bar, my name is Diego Molano and I come from Boyacá. Boyacá is the nicest place in Latin America that is located in the center of Colombia. And I live in Washington and I have a consultant firm where we are involved in helping governments and large multinationals and corporations to make digital transformation. We work for the public sector with policy-making projects and initiatives for governments in Latin America and in some countries in Europe. I'm a general manager of our venture capital fund investing in startups across Europe and Latin America. And we see how countries from the financial perspective, education and health perspective, they are able to transform themselves digitally. And it's a pleasure to be here speaking in the SSIG. And speaking of secrets, I have to convince my wife today because I like cycling. Those that are very fond of cycling, you know, everybody
Y
wants to
acaba de
go
salir mi
cycling,
bicicleta,
and there
la
came
ideal, la que yo siempre
the
he soñado
ideal, the
y está en
best
rebaja,
bike
que
that I
está
would like to purchase
todavía esta semana en las
and
rebajas de Memorial Day Weekend.
is in
Entonces
the
tengo que llegar hoy a la
weekend
casa a convencer a mi mujer
website.
que ya
So
llevamos todo este año con
I
el
need
cinturón
to
apretado,
convince
pues
her
es un presupuesto apretado en la casa.
that we have a
Entonces
tight
tengo que
budget
convencerla que me deje
but
gastar
in the
unos cuantos
household, but I
miles de
have to
dólares,
convince her that
que
I
es un
spend
poquito,
thousands
en
of
una bicicleta
dollars
nueva.
on a new
Entonces
bike.
estoy pensando qué
So
hacer si
I
me
am
da idea de
thinking of
sacar.
what to
Ese
do.
es mi secreto.
This is
Lisania, vamos
the
contigo.
secret that I
Cuéntanos,
gotta reveal.
¿qué haces en República Dominicana y qué es eso del Concel?
Lisania, what are you
Bien,
doing in the
perfecto.
Dominican
Buenas
Republic?
tardes a todos y todos.
Good
Creo que
afternoon to
es
you
de
all.
tarde ya para todos los
I
países.
think it's
Mi nombre es
the
Lisania
evening
Pérez y
for most of the
actualmente
countries
funjo
for
como
the
la secretaria
afternoon.
ejecutiva de la
My name
Comisión
is
Técnica
Lisania Pérez, I'm the
Regional de
Executive
Telecomunicaciones.
Secretary for
Este organismo
Comtelca,
pertenece
it's a
al
communication
sistema de la
agency
integración centroamericana
involved in the Central
y
American
engloba tanto
Regulatory Agency
ministerios TICs como
encompassing
reguladores,
ministries,
todo claro
ICTs,
está en
and
materia de las
regulatory entities
telecomunicaciones
in
y tecnologías
telecommunications
de la
and
información.
information technology.
Somos creadores de política pública, por
We
decirlo de alguna forma,
are
y en dado caso también,
forging
elaboramos
or
recomendaciones y estudios
makers of public
para
policy,
orientar a
and
los
we
tomadores
perform
de decisiones
studies
para
to
creación de
guide
políticas
decision
regulatorias.
makers to
Yo
create
soy dominicana,
regulatory
actualmente estoy
policies.
acá
I
de
am
manera
based in the
de
Dominican
teletrabajo.
Republic.
Hasta tanto
I
pues
am
hagamos unas
teleoperator and
adecuaciones
we're
en las
working
oficinas de la
remotely
Secretaría Ejecutiva
until
que
we
tendrán,
go
pues ya
back
tienen
to
sede
the
en la
executive
República de Panamá,
secretariat
de Panamá.
or the executive
Entonces,
secretary
a
that
su orden para
is
todo lo
based
que
in
necesiten.
Panama. So I'm
Bueno,
gonna be
mi
at your
secreto,
disposal to take any questions.
mi secreto es que
And
acabo
what
de
is your
comprar un
secret?
tiquete
I
para
just
Nueva
bought a
York
ticket
para el
to fly
verano
to New York
y
for
justo
summertime.
lo acabo de comprar.
And I
Ustedes son los
just
primeros en
purchased it, and
enterar.
you're the ones
Gracias.
that are really finding out.
¿Y te vas de vacaciones a Nueva York pues, de trabajo?
Vacaciones, sí,
Vacations,
Realmente
okay.
vamos a un
Yes,
lugar que
it's
se llama Cape Cod,
vacations.
que queda en Massachusetts, pero de ahí no vamos en vehículo
Now,
desde Nueva
We're
York.
gonna drive
Ese es
from
mi secreto
New
porque
York to
justo la acabo de
Massachusetts.
comprar.
Si vienes a Colombia en ese paseo,
If you come
te
to
ofrezco una buena
to
comida
Colombia,
colombiana.
Buenísimo,
I can offer you
gracias.
good food here, good
Bueno,
Colombian food.
Marilena,
Thank you.
¿cómo estás?
Hola,
¿En qué parte del
listo,
mundo
¿cómo
estás?
están? No, estoy en...
Miss Maidana, what
yo
are
voy
you?
a diferir porque yo digo que yo soy la que vivo en el
I
lugar
am
más
the
bonito de
one
América
that
Latina.
lives in Latin
De la
America.
cintura de América,
I live
en el puro centro de Costa
in
Rica.
the center
Encantada de
of Central
saludarlos.
America and Costa Rica,
Eh,
the belt
Bueno, mi
of
nombre es Mariliana Méndez.
Central
Para los que
America.
nos
My
escuchan
name
desde
is
la escuela,
Mariana
realmente un
Mendez.
gusto estar aquí
For
en
the
esta
attendees that are
16ª
online, it's a
edición.
pleasure to be on the 16th edition
Además,
of the SSIG.
recordar que he estado muy presente en la
Let me
escuela
remind
desde
you that
muchos
I've
otros,
been in this
desde muchas
school
otras ediciones
attending these
y
sessions in
realmente
previous
es muy
editions,
placentero siempre la
and
energía
it's
que
always
esta
a
escuela
pleasure
transmite.
to see the energy
Yo
and
soy
how
la secretaria
enthusiastic
general
these
de la
people
Asociación
are.
Interamericana
I'm
de
the
Empresas de
Secretary General
Telecomunicaciones, una
of
asociación que
the
tiene más de 40 años de trabajar
telecommunications
en
secretaries
la
here in Costa
industria
Rica
de las
that has worked
telecomunicaciones,
many
buscando
years in
mejorar las
telecommunications,
condiciones de
and we want to
inversión
improve
y además de ello,
investment
pues,
conditions, and at the
tratando de
same
compartir
time
las
we
mejores
try to
prácticas
compete and share
en
the
el
best
desarrollo
practices
de
while
infraestructura
developing
digital y en
infrastructure,
general
digital
en los temas de
infrastructure in
digitalización
terms of
en América
digitalization
Latina.
across
Me
Latin
pusiste
America.
en un punto complejo, algún secreto que
It's very
no revelo.
complex.
Yo creo que soy demasiado
It's very
conversadora
complex.
para tener un secreto. Tendría que ser algo muy
I don't have a
reciente.
secret.
Bueno,
I don't have a
pues,
secret,
aquí
but
somos
still
todos
it
oídos.
has to be very recent. We are all ears.
Creo que no tengo planes tan bonitos
I
como
don't
los que
have
este año todavía programados,
new
ni tengo
plans,
aficiones tan
and
caras
I
como
don't
las tuyas.
have
Así
expensive
que,
hobbies as buying such
decir
expensive
que
bikes.
como proyecto de
But
vida,
as
a mí
my
se me
way of
pasa el año
living,
entrante, así que es algo que nunca no había contado a la gente del sector. Ya es un secreto a voces, pero un secreto al fin.
Oye, felicitaciones, felicitaciones.
congratulations,
Yo creo que hace muchos
congratulations.
años pensé que no tenías,
For many years, I thought that you didn't have any children,
pensé que tenías así de pronto de high school.
or you had children in high school but not at the university. No, they were born many years ago. They're almost my age. I don't know how that time framework works, but that's the way I say it. Caesar,
¿Dónde estás?
Gracias.
let me welcome Caesar. Thank you. I would like to thank and acknowledge all the attendees. I'm in Panama. I'm from Panama and I work remotely Together with Nisane, I lead telecommunication affairs for LACNIC in Latin America and the Caribbean, and I work on development, ICT policies in the region, and I actively participate in fora, intergovernment, CITEL, Internet Governance Forum, and that is why I am glad that you have invited me and you have given me the opportunity to address my presentation, my know-how, and to discuss what is our perspective in order to improve the state of the region. My secret is that I'm a fan, a baseball fan. I love baseball. I follow always the preseason, the spring matches. I go to the games, I go to the stadiums, and I'm a big fan. It's a minor thing. It's not that ambitious as buying a bike, but that is my secret. Good. Milo. Yes, I'm going to speak in Portuñol.
Okay, so welcome. I'm going to speak English because my Spanish isn't good enough for a panel of this quality or this caliber.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks South School for the invitation. I'm Nilo Pasquale. I'm the superintendent for planning and regulation in Brazil, here in the regulatory agency in Anatel, the telecom regulator. Basically, my area is responsible for all regulation related to telecommunications. My area is responsible as well for service universalization. So we're the ones who discuss all the issues related to bidding auctions and things like that and obligations. So service expansion and infrastructure expansion, it's all under our purview here. Of course, it's a collective discussion, involves many areas in Anatel. We are only the conductors of this discussion. And again, I welcome very much the invitation and thank you again. And for a secret, I don't think I have money. Probably the current one is that I'm trying to get some vacation from my boss, but it's kind of hard to find the correct time to actually leave. But I'm pretty sure we'll manage to get it eventually. Thank you, Diego.
Thank you, Nilo. Y vamos con...
Muchas gracias. We aren't seeing who's next. Can we see? Hello. I'm going to speak Portuguese. And I'm from Brazil. Who's from Brazil over here? Yay. Well, hi everybody. I promise that I'm going to speak very slowly so that everybody can understand me. I am Isaías Arruda. I'm representing the Brazilian Internet Association. And I also work in a company called Bemol, which is in the heart of the Amazon. We're in Manaus. We're in the northern region of the Amazon. And all of these different areas, Roraima, Acre, and Western Pará. We're facing a lot of different challenges. And the main focus of our activity is how to include the north of Brazil and the Amazonian region into the area, the Colombian Amazon too, the Amazon which crosses frontiers and brings countries together. The idea is to help internet reach all these different places which are so remote. But in Brazil, we also have a country where 19% of it is completely unconnected to internet. So that's a major challenge. So one of our big objectives is, with the projects that we're doing and the strategies that we're following, is to reduce that gap, the digital gap, and to deliver connectivity to the region and to link the countries through technology. I have a question. Do you have a secret that nobody knows and you would like to share with us now? I do have a few secrets that I can share. I'm going to talk about some of them, but I think the secret is that all of these people are seeking to discuss the future of the governance of internet in Latin America. That, for me, is such a huge difference. I'm amazed by this. Every time that we agree or we disagree on something, we are working on sharing. That's the thing I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much, Isaias. It's not exactly the kind of secret I thought that we had to share, but anyway. In terms of internet, Latin America has progressed in the deployment of internet, in penetration. If we look at the figures, we can see that there's still a problem there. But there are several sources that tell us that over 70% of Latin Americans say they're connected to internet. In some countries, this is more than 80%. In some countries, it's less than 70%. And we're asking ourselves how we're doing. Latin America has as much of an internet penetration as China. But let's look at the reality rather than the figures. If we look at a small municipality in Brazil, or in Central America, or in Colombia, or any other country, and we ask any family, are you connected to internet? Probably 70% of them will say yes. And then the question is, how do you connect to internet? And the answer of over 70% of these who are connected is going to be, I use it with my smartphone. Oh, okay then. And whose cell phone is that? Well, it's mine, but I lend it to my kids, and so on and so forth. And how do you connect to internet? Most of them are using prepaid data plans, which is pretty limited. These users, most of them, when they have money, buy these packs, but they go through them really fast. But thanks to the zero waiting, these users can continue to use Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook, and they think they're connected to internet, and so they continue to use them. So during the pandemic, we realized that the figures weren't actually telling us the truth. So when we started measuring internet penetration in a different way, then we started looking at meaningful connectivity, and we discovered that, in fact, only 10% of families with children are properly connected. What does that mean? They have a broadband connection, which is unlimited, and that each person has at least their one terminal, and that their access to internet is unlimited, that they don't have a ceiling on their consumption. Only 10% compared with Northern Hemisphere, where it's 70%. So now we're getting a very different picture of reality. We're not as well connected as we thought. So this is a kind of new gap that we have to identify and close. Now, in the first round of questions, I want to ask our panelists, how can we close this particular gap? What is the problem that we're facing? And why are people not properly connected? What can we do about it? Let's start with Isaias. Thank you very much. Well, I have a little presentation which in some way answers this question. How do we close this particular digital gap? This question has multiple answers, and I'd like to share my presentation and talk about a little bit about the current infrastructure of internet in these countries. And I want to start by talking about certain. We need to make this a dynamic, so please can you be quick? Yes, of course. First, I just want to clarify that Central America, and including Mexico and Dominican Republic, I have data from the region that does not include Mexico, and other data that do include Mesoamerica, which does include Mexico and Colombia. But what I'd like to do is go back to the question. In Codelco, we carried out several studies on how to close this digital gap. And the most recent one focused on digital literacy, a way of encouraging inclusion. And I always tend to focus on education first, so we can see what the things look like in figures. Now, if we look at the different countries in the region, the percentage of internet penetration is proportional to people's educational level. The lower the education, the lower internet penetration in this country. So I would say that a form of achieving this digital transformation is to encourage analog literacy and shift into digital literacy. That would be a way of improving literacy. But if we're talking about infrastructure, it's precisely in those countries where the deployment of infrastructure is less solid, where there is less electricity. People need electricity to make the telecommunications infrastructure work. So those are two fairly important axes of my contribution. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lizania. So it's a question people ask every day. How can we close the digital gap? What is the main problem here? You're on mute. Hello? As you were saying, the first step to close the digital gap is to understand what's going on. It's not just one gap, it's several gaps. We're not just talking about an infrastructure gap, which is the most difficult one to close in terms of investment. But as Lizania was saying, in terms of digital literacy, and there are figures which support the fact that this gap has a lot to do with poverty, has a lot to do with vulnerability, has got a lot to do with literacy, and not just digital literacy, but analog literacy. 84% of those people with higher education have fixed broadband access, which enable high-speed connectivity all around the clock without any limitations. And only 50% of the households with primary level education we're talking about the fact that there is an issue that has to do with education. There are others that have to do with different regions. For instance, if we compare ourselves to other OECD countries, we're pretty far down the scale. Another key element, which we've already talked about and which needs to be emphasized, is that mobile broadband has been the democratizing factor of access to internet. And it may not be the solution, but the younger generations of technologists are going to be able to create Wi-Fi connections, enabling this deployment to speed up, because we no longer need to reach people with a physical infrastructure. So there's a mix of different solutions which could enable us to close the gap. Solutions where we are able to identify the big problems and where we need to invest, how we can, through public policies, take action to overcome or eliminate these obstacles, and a process of regulatory innovation in the broadest sense possible, including those that have been issued by different agencies or ministries, which enable us to improve the conditions that will help the digital gap to close. I think that there is a lot of things that we can discuss in the region, and this process also involves other sectors in the economy, other sectoral authorities. It's not just about connecting schools without involving the Ministry of Education 100%. We must ensure that we are able to sustain that connectivity over time as well. So there's a huge opportunity to improve things in Latin America. And this also goes through a process where we have to convince people from the bottom up, grassroots up. We need to drive these issues. Very often, the people in authority are rather more traditional and less open to the digital world. This is another problem we have in the region. So we've got to sharpen our powers of persuasion. I think this is something that applies to us all, doesn't it? I'd like to bring up another major issue. We need investments to close this gap, don't we? How much is being invested at the moment? A recent study shows that capex per capita, how much operators are in the telecommunications industry are investing. And in Latin America, obviously it's not as big. Countries such as Peru is investing $23 per year per capita, Colombia $31. Other countries more in the lead, like Uruguay, have $70 per head. Chile, nearly $100 per head. We're talking about a spread of $20 to $100 in Latin America. But these are really low when you compare it to the rest of the world. In Japan, they're investing $300 per capita. Japan is investing 10 times more than Colombia and so much more than Peru, 3 times more than Chile. United States invests $240 per capita, Spain $120. So we have a gap, but the speed at which we're going is much slower than more developed countries. So what are we going to do to close that gap? Where are we going to find the money to close that gap? How can we attract investment, particularly in fiber optics? Thank you, Diego. That's a very interesting question. And what is particularly interesting is statistics, the figures you just shared. You were saying, for instance, that there are, depending on who you ask, 70% of the population connected to internet, and depends on who you ask, could be as much as 80%. But in that sense, we see that there's a huge range, and according to who you ask, the numbers of those who aren't connected also differ. We see that there are highly densely populated countries which have very low penetration and very low development levels. Liciana and Maria Elena were giving us some examples of what's going on in the region as regards education or other things in the region. And that's particularly clear that in countries that are less developed, they're just not getting connectivity. We've also identified some more developed countries where there isn't any connectivity in remote areas. Everything's all fine in the urban areas or the coastline, but in more remote areas, perhaps because you can only get there by sea or by air, there is no road access, there is no connectivity. And there are countries that are in development that are scarcely populated. There are people living near cities that still don't have connectivity. And as Diego said, they just use their phones and buy a prepaid data pack. And that's the way in which they connect. So all of this shows us that those who are not connected, it's not just a business case. We need a lot of money to reach them in any of the modalities talked about to date, whether these are remote areas or that they have low population density or low levels of social development. So you could say the solution or the recipe for success should be putting more money. But the numbers that you're sharing with us, like Chile compared with Peru, don't really encourage a situation where there would be more people connected. So we need to develop more public policies which are more inclusive, taking into account that many of our regulations in this sense go back to the 1990s, where internet didn't have the role that it has today. Because today we're using the internet for absolutely everything. Now, there might be some more complete solutions, different kinds of technology. Now people are talking about low orbit satellites, so we could say, well, that's fine. We can just get connected via low orbit satellites. The people might say, well, let's work harder to develop community networks. But there is another aspect to this, which is to make the regulatory load lighter for the operators. At LACNIC, we've been working very closely with small internet service providers or Wi-Fi providers, wireless internet service providers, or the WISPs, and many of them are actually acting illegal. I wouldn't like to call them pirates, but they certainly don't have all the requisite authorizations in their respective countries. So they are unlicensed, as it were, but they are connecting the unconnected. So what do we need to do to encourage small countries companies to provide these services. Maybe we need better public policies, more flexible use of and access to the spectrum. The regulatory charges maybe should be lightened. All of these things need to be discussed. And that's where public policies come into their own in our region. And I think that this represents a great opportunity. That's how we see it. Obviously, there may be other questions about this, but I just wanted to say this here. Thank you very much, Cesar. It's obviously clearly very important to continue working with the governments so that the regulatory charges aren't so high for operators. I've been working in this area for years, trying to convince governments. But you know something? Nilo, I just wanted to ask you, and Mariana too, what Cesar has just been saying. Of each real charged to a telecommunications user in Brazil, how much of that goes to the state between the tax charges? We are seeing that the investment per user, we're investing $33 per capita in Brazil, for instance. How can we get this investment in Brazil to grow? When you look at things like the income of the entire industry, and there are some countries where obviously this is low, but the fiscal authorities always see telecoms as a great ally because the revenues, collecting revenue is easy because there aren't many players in the market, and it's easy to collect revenue and taxes. But we actually need to look at the fiscal burden on the operators. So this is a two-pronged question. How can we increase investment and how can we reduce the fiscal burden?
Diego, vou falar em
portunhol. Okay, I'm going to speak Portunhol very slowly. The fiscal aspect is a really big problem in Brazil. Recently, we had a fiscal reform where it took about 11 years until we managed to start implementing part of it. It takes 10 years to implement it, but historically, Brazil has always had a major fiscal burden, one of the largest in the world, over 30%. If you add together all the different taxes that you can think of, it depends a little bit on the region, but this could be as much as over 40%. In terms of investment in the sector, 30 or 40% of the taxes means that there's very little left to make investments. And the recipe, it seems to be a long way off from more developed countries. In Brazil, average income in reais is 20 to 60 reais. That's not very much in dollars, is it? So the average for a user is like less than $10. And we're looking at the need for investments of $200 or $300 per user per capita. So you can see there's a long way to go. So when we're talking about inclusion and the digital gap, this is one of the key elements. Brazil is not a rich country in that sense. There are a lot of differences between the population. There are big income gaps between the richest and the poorest. Obviously, the population which has the most difficulties of paying the services, to do the shopping and to buy devices, all of those things. Most people access internet, as we know, on their phones. It's the main device used to access internet. And they very often go to public Wi-Fi networks. It's usually a community Wi-Fi, or it's shared Wi-Fi, shared between several people in the same locale. So this is a really big challenge. It's not just a regulatory issue. We have many actions underway, and before going into detail about whether people should have device, we need to talk about the telecommunications regime. The priority here as far as the regulatory authorities are concerned is to expand the infrastructure. It's expanding our 5G network. We need lots of cables and pipes because the way in which a current infrastructure was made is insufficient. And this means that we have to place obligations on the sector. We have commitments to expand the telecoms infrastructure until 2029, 2030. But we've got a lot to do before we get there in terms of infrastructure, many gaps to fill. But it's something that we're constantly evaluating. But basically, we have a lot to do. Much of that falls on the shoulders of the state. Public policy, public funds are all going to be necessary to close that gap. And I think that is an inescapable solution, even for more developed countries, like in the United States, for instance. They have billions of dollars in funds, much more than we have in Brazil. And precisely because this is a problem that everybody has to a greater or lesser degree. But I don't think there's a single country that doesn't have some sort of funding or public policy development to try and close these digital gaps. So I think that's the situation that we're facing. Thank you very much. Isaías has lots of experience with reaching more remote areas. Isaías, we're talking about the fact that industry is facing a really big problem. There isn't enough investment to deploy the infrastructure required. And it's not just about the big telecoms operators, but more a case of the places where there is greatest population density. For instance, Isaías is in the Amazon. And in the Amazon, the big operators aren't going to reach these areas because it's just not profitable for them, because their populations are very scant and people don't have very much money. So why don't you tell us about your experience in the Amazon? How are you managing to develop telecommunications networks in such scarcely populated areas, which are so poor? Can you tell us how you achieve the connections in areas that are so remote? Well, that's a very interesting question. This morning we heard about the plans for Brazil and talking about the northern region. The northern region has 450 municipalities. 35 have absolutely no connectivity whatsoever. They don't even have a cell phone tower. They don't have radio, internet, fiber optics, anything. So many of these places are would be able to use satellite communications. But the problem in the Amazon isn't so much an issue of infrastructure, but all the financial conditions to build these networks, but other issues. In the state of Amazon, there is 72 municipalities, 10 of which have access to a road. The others you can only access on a boat on the river or a plane. So we're talking about, it's not just a distance. Sometimes you can travel for days, 2 weeks on a boat to travel across the Amazon, just to get from one city to the next. So the financial cost for an internet service provider or an operator reach these communities is even greater. In Brazil, we have 8,000 small internet service providers, and we have some programs to free up public resources to enable us to reach these locations with internet. And this is something that would be totally subsidized. And I'm talking about quite a low cost. As I said, we are going through a fiscal reform process. And these companies are paying 30 or 40% in terms of fiscal burden. So, and this is going to go up for these companies. So how on earth can you build a network to link two cities which are 100 kilometers apart, and the only way that they can be accessed is on a boat? In Brazil, we have a draft bill which is called Connectivity, the project Connectivity. And this was launched 11 years ago. Its objective was to link all the rivers in the Amazon. But it started a long time ago. And that's a question that I have for you today. Brazil has 150 Starlink antennas, 150,000. And 12,000 of these are in the Amazon. I'm not defending the technology or the manufacturers, but the need that there is, which is way behind innovation. We have entire cities, and when we talk about this, we can't not talk about social inclusion. We need to talk about the way internet is used. We've just come out of a pandemic, which wasn't so long ago. And everybody who was connected to internet could continue working. They had their home office. They could use internet as their resources. But in South America as a whole, there were vast areas which were left completely in the dark for all that time. And that is our responsibility. It's a responsibility of the governments. And it's a joint responsibility. We all need to be on board with this. This is a slide that I want to share with you. This is the city of Manaus, and there's a meaning to this. This is the only means of transport in the Amazon. If you lived in the Amazon, in the Pará, boats are the only means of transport. We are closer to the past than to the present. At times when the river floods or swells, there is no access. So we don't have airports, and if you don't have any connectivity, these cities grind to a halt for months on end. And at the same time, we're talking about the impact on the communities, because when you connect people, you are providing them with health and education. It's so much more than just internet. We are schools in the Amazon, in the interior of the Pará. They've only just started being connected. But we're talking about big cities like Manaus, Belém, and Boa Vista. And these cities have a catchment area. But even there, we're still having problems with internet access and connectivity. And this is something I want to share with you. This little boat here, this is a jata. This is the jato that he does a trip of some 70 kilometers across the water. And just to give you an idea, Ipatinga is it's a 36-hour journey to Ipatinga to Manaus. And the point is that you're on that boat and there is no communication whatever during 36 hours. There you don't have access to your social networks. You can't chat to anybody. But they're using satellite technology now. They're using Starlink so that they can, if they have any problems on the water, they can obviously get out of trouble, but also just to enable people to connect. And it's expanding. So the boat takes internet to these tiny little communities. It visits some of the most remote areas on the Amazon. The federal police is now using it, and more people are using it. And we're using more Starlink points in households as well now. In the middle of the forest. So all kinds of technology that we have, whether it's used for good or for bad. But we can't work without internet. And we have to look at the benefits that this can bring for the region. Because without internet, we're not going to go anywhere. We can't just sit around and wait. We have to go faster. We have to move more quickly. Today, the government of Brazil signed an agreement with the government of Colombia. It was a credit line to connect Colombia and Brazil, which is an example. It's a simple example of the possibilities. This is a chap who runs an agency, and he used to take 7 hours. He used to stay in each city and he has Starlink so that people can come and use internet connection on his boat. And it enables people to carry out bank transactions and those sorts of things. Norte Conectado is this project which is contemplating 8 communication routes, and it's going to connect most of the north of the country, 12,000 kilometers. It's going to be, and 1.3 billion reales, and 10 million people will benefit, and 50 municipalities will be covered from Acre to Roraima. And you can see what I mean with this picture. Sorry, Diego. Can I just interrupt you? I just want to interrupt you for a second. I wanted to say that we also have the Undersecretary of Telecommunications of Argentina has just joined us. He's joined us very quickly. He has a complicated agenda, but if we can include him in the panel, we can include him in some of the questions as soon as we finish with Isaias. Hector has just joined us. That's why I wanted to bring this up. But Chesayas, who's going to put the money up for the investment? Who's paying for the investment for this Norte Conectado project? It's a federal government project. It's a consortium of 12 companies for the first phase. The first phase for this Infoway, and you can see it here going along. Infovia 0 from Macapá to Santarém, and then there'll be a link from Santarém to Manaus. And this project is being developed with federal funds. A consortium of 12 companies came together to handle the consortium, and they're responsible for maintaining the infrastructure and ensuring the distribution of internet to all the localities through which the line runs. Then we're looking at the Paracacá Belém line, and so on and so forth. The objective is from this area, which you can see Infovia 2, which is Tabatinga. And this Infoway will be used to link with Colombia. But the main challenge isn't the initial investment, which has already been carried out. We have already got the support of 3 governments for this project. But the main challenge is to keep the fiber optics working. And that's my challenge for you. We saw the first break in the fiber optics 80 kilometers outside the city of Manapaka. And that break cost millions, and we don't know who's going to pay for that. So you don't really have a way of connecting the north of the country without regular resources. You can't charge people for this, or there isn't a company that could pay for that, a single one. And also, it's necessary for the companies to do their bit. As I said, there are 12 companies who are working on this project, which has been run by the federal government. And this is the raft, which is actually laying the fiber optics. You see, it's really big. That spool, that's the fiber optic cable which is being used, and it's been laid on the riverbed. And it's now, unlike the sea, it's much more complex to lay it along the riverbed. These rivers go up and down every year. So if you don't get just the right part of the riverbed, when you get the waters go down, you're going to have exposed with under the mud, which then shrinks. And so it's a massive challenge just to be able to get the cables laid, because at times the river goes down a lot. The climate actually is one of the reasons why this project is delayed. We have so many Starlinks in the Amazonian region, and we have the fiber optics. Now, internet has to get there. If it doesn't get there, the communities won't develop. So we've been working on this for nearly 12 years. And according to the numbers, everything should be ready. But, new information is telling us that it's not going to be ready before 2030. Well, thank you very much, Isaias. So that's right, Hector, over to you. We have the pleasure of having you join us, the Secretary of telecommunications and connectivity of Argentina. It's a pleasure to see you, Hector. We have 3 questions for you. First, tell us about yourself. Second, tell us a secret that nobody knows. And third, we're talking about infrastructure, and we've discovered that one of the problems that we have is the lack of capital investment, because investment levels in Latin America are very low, and the per capita level is very low, between $20 and $100 per capita in the region, when in Japan it's 300, Spain 120, the US 200. So what can we do? Where can we get the money to invest in infrastructure? But the first question is, tell us who you are. Secondly, a secret.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I would like to send greetings to the audience and to the director. My name is Hector Licia. I am the Under Secretary of Telecommunications of Argentina in Innovation and Technology. We started yesterday organization of certain ministries in Argentina, so there's still uncertainty whether we are going to depend on the chief cabinet or we're going to depend on other organizations. During 2016 and 19, the telecommunications secretary and with other rules and regulations, depending on the state-owned company that was regulating telecommunications, there was the National Telecommunications Commission at that time. I'm going to tell you something that is embarrassing as a secret that happened not so long ago. It was embarrassing. I play soccer, and it occurred to me going against somebody that was larger, that was given a full speed. So I learned the hard way that speed is equal mass times acceleration. So I was in pain after the game, and after the CAT scan, I had like 3 ribs fractured. And I never told anybody because it was so embarrassing. That was running against that person, that it was a humiliation. That I had 5 ribs fractured, problems in my thorax. So I didn't even tell that I had a single rib fracture. But at least you recover from 2. And you're a marathonist in mountain ranges, right? I don't know how that sport is called, but you know, it's quite a sportsmanship. Yeah, I'm a runner. It's called cross-country running. My ribs do not hurt right now. In the past, I had worse accidents. It's a matter of time. Not much has to be done. I cannot even sneeze. Hopefully in 15 or 20 days, everything will be fully wounded and will be fully recovered. Let's go to the topic of interest for you, and it's what you have raised. There's an obvious and apparent answer. why
somos
we
países menos
invest
ricos.
less is because we're developing
Necesariamente
countries.
creo que hay un correlato
We're
entre
poor
lo que algunas
countries.
sociedades pueden invertir,
That has
no
a strong
solo
correlation of
en
what
el sector
societies
comunicaciones, sino también
can invest,
en otra producción de bienes públicos,
not
en
only in
otra
capex but
producción de
also
servicios
public
o
goods or
producción de bienes
utilities,
que tiene que ver con el nivel de riqueza de esa sociedad. Si uno
and it has
quisiera
to
irse
do
a una
with
reflexión más profunda,
being
tendría que decir,
developed
bueno,
or
¿por qué hay
developing
algunas
countries.
sociedades más prósperas
We have
y
more
otras,
prosperous societies and we have
particularmente en el sur
poorer
del hemisferio? No,
societies,
no
especially
absolutamente, un poco
in the
en
global
términos
south.
relativos bastante más atrasadas o
We
menos
are
prósperas.
kind of lying behind
Yo
compared
creo
to other
que parte
countries
de
in the
la
first
respuesta o
world.
parte de la solución
Part of the solution.
de que no tenemos suficientemente CAPEX ha venido o
We
viene
do
de la
not
mano de que
have
CAPEX se pone
the
otro.
necessary capital
Recién
investments.
creo que hablaba
I believe
Isaías
that
o
is due to, as
de algún otro
Isaias said, as well as
Nilo, hablaban por nombre y apellido de
they
Starlink,
were speaking of Starlink
el fenómeno que significa en áreas remotas,
and the phenomenon that is going to
bajo
solve the
nivel de
coverage in
acceso,
remote areas with low
la
access, low
donde el
connectivity
ecosistema
areas
hoy
where
es ese con ya
systems
está instalado porque es el primero, pero
are already
seguramente
installed.
en el curso de los próximos años vendrán
And I
otros
believe
más.
in the next 2
Entonces,
years, other
creo que OneWeb
players
el año que viene,
will
de Amazon,
join the
un
marketplace.
poquito más demorado. Entonces, esto viene a
So I
resolver en
think that
principio
there are some delays,
el
but
problema de cobertura.
for
Hoy
now,
hay
it solves
oferta
the
y va a haber
coverage
una
problem.
oferta
There's
creciente de cobertura global que están desarrollando
this supply
plataformas de gran
of global
altitud que
coverage,
prometen
and we have high
también
altitude
ser una solución,
platforms. That would be a solution
incluso
also,
más económica en algún
which
caso.
would be cheaper.
Yo diría que eso nos va dejando en todo caso que hay otro problema.
And this gives rise to another
El
issue,
problema de brecha de acceso, ya no
the
brecha de
digital or the
cobertura.
access divide
Obviamente
or the coverage divide,
tiene un costo.
which always we need to pay a price for
Acudir
that.
a una solución como son las de las
Resorting,
constelaciones
such as resorting
no
to a
geos,
solution
no
of
todo el mundo puede afrontar. Indudablemente
solutions
que
or
ciertas
constellations
industrias, ciertos
that
establecimientos
it's not even
productivos, incluso
affordable
ciertas
to many,
personas
some people,
que
some
viven en áreas
societies,
rurales
or some
tienen
sectors,
poder
like for example
adquisitivo
in the
que
rural
permite
sectors, they have
rápidamente
enough flexibility
incorporar este
that
servicio
may
a su uso
include
y
this service
productivos, pero no es en
to
general,
their
menos en el continente
productivity
latinoamericano,
services,
donde la ruralidad, sobre todo en las áreas geográficas
but
de difícil acceso, como puede ser la montaña o la selva,
remote
están asociadas también
locations
a
like
importantes
jungles
niveles
and mountain
de
ranges
básicas.
are
Pero
related to
teniendo
areas
resuelto en principio,
that are
teniendo a
not
disposición
widely
una
covered,
solución
but having the
costo-eficiente
availability
en términos de
of this
lo que hoy
solution
conocemos
or technologies
ciertas
as
áreas aisladas,
we know
probablemente
as
el problema que
Starlinks
nos queda es
for
decir, bueno,
remote areas.
¿cómo conseguimos
The issue is how
el
to
dinero para
get enough funding
que la gente acceda a ese servicio? Por eso lo que nos queda sin resolver, y de
to
vuelta
provide
está
this
muy
service.
asociado a
And I
la
believe
pobreza del continente, es la brecha de acceso.
this
No
is
se presenta
related
solo en
to
las
the
áreas, sino a veces
access
también
divide that is
en grandes
not
barriadas
in
de
this
barrios
country,
humildes. Por supuesto,
but
con
in
una
other
visión
communities.
distinta. En muchos lugares, el propio mercado informal en el que se desenvuelven estas
In
economías,
informal
hoy había
sectors, I was seeing, for example,
fotografía de fibra óptica en la
a
Rosiña,
snapshot of
probablemente el asentamiento,
the
uno
fiber
de los
optic coverage in
asentamientos
La
más
Rosiña,
famosos en el
one of the most
continente. Lo
important
mismo
shanty towns
en algunos
in Brazil.
tenemos nosotros, pero bueno, hemos
We have
hablado
settlements or
de un tema
shanty
que también
towns like
tiene otro
that,
tipo de condiciones,
but I was
¿no?
impressed by the
Tenemos
coverage they have.
las reglas para que vaya alguien ahí, cómo se resuelven eventualmente los conflictos que puede haber entre las distintas personas, en última instancia cómo se resuelve también el problema de la falta de paz, ¿no? Pero bueno,
And also, Latin America has
otro tipo
affordability
de
issues,
restricciones.
but that's another
Yo
horse
diría,
of a different color.
hoy, de la mano de
Now,
CAPEX, que han
together
puesto
with the
otros,
capex
tenemos parte del problema
invested
solucionado,
by
y por
others,
supuesto que lo que tenemos
we
que ver
have
es
solved
cómo
that
esta no es
problem
una
in
solución
part, but as
que
this is
pueda servir para
not
cualquier tipo
a
de carencia, que sea la más
one
eficiente,
size
cómo resolvemos el
fits all
problema
solution,
donde la densidad se
we see
incrementa y quizás
We need to see how
técnicas
to
con otras,
address
pero seguimos ahí
other
teniendo el mismo
technical
problema
obstacles,
problema de CAPEX, problema de, y problemas de
but that will
de
require
lado lo que sería resolver
capital
la
expenditure
macroeconomía y tratemos
issues
de darnos en algunas
to
respuestas
resolve
que podemos dar de
macroeconomics,
nuestra
the
gestión
macroeconomic
de lo
aspects
micro y
or
algunas que
challenges of
tienen que dar
Argentina,
necesariamente de
microeconomics
la gestión también
aspects as
macro,
well.
como es, bueno, si tenemos un problema no lo agravemos haciéndolo con dificultar el acceso al
For
cultivo,
example,
hacerlo con
we
aranceles
shouldn't
a
worsen
la
even the
importación de
situation by
equipamientos
adding
fabricados
device
en
or
países,
import
con
devices that we
decisiones
can
a veces que vienen
manufacture
de la mano de
domestically.
pero priorizando
These
alguna
are part of
necesidad
the
transitoria
solutions
fiscal que siempre que suelen tener nuestros países. Hay muchas
of
soluciones donde
temporary
podríamos dar espectro
fiscal
gratis
solutions
para
that we
medidas
are
rápidas,
enforcing here,
calidad,
like
y
a
a veces
quick
se
fix.
demoran porque,
Sometimes
bueno,
these quick
porque
fixes
la
are
burocracia
delayed because of red
mucho
tape
tiempo,
in a
porque
country
estamos pendientes más de una
because
recaudación o de una decisión
we
a veces
require more tax
consensuadas con muchos
collection,
sectores, cuando en esto hay que
or we need to reach a
avanzar
consensus
más
with
rápido. Después
other
está la
sectors,
propia burocracia administrativa
and
del
also
municipio. Creo que en mi país al menos, creo que otros
bureaucracy
países
of
han avanzado
municipalities.
bastante.
I believe other countries like Colombia and Brazil
Han
have
avanzado
made a
mucho
lot
en
of progress
simplificar y abaratar
in
todo el tema de permisos y autorizaciones para el despliegue de infraestructura. Había
approvals
inicialmente
for
pensado
developing infrastructure,
exclusivamente para antenas, pero creo yo que hoy recientemente el problema
like
está también
antennas,
de fibra óptica. Hemos tenido
fiber
casos en
optic
los que
cabling.
es más caro el permiso municipal que comprar y tender la fibra.
In Argentina, sometimes it's more
Así
expensive
que,
to depend on a municipal
de hecho, el
copper
otro día en
line
un evento en
rather than
Argentina,
installing new
dentro de
fiber
una cámara
optics
decía,
lines.
díganme un lugar de la Argentina, planteando la gravedad de ese problema, donde no haya internet de fibra óptica,
In
ustedes
some
me dan
problems of
los permisos
Argentina,
municipales
in
y
some
los derechos de servidumbre, les puedo asegurar que en muy pocos meses todos
some
los
parts
lugares
of
están
Argentina.
conectados. Porque en todos los lugares, aun cuando sean
I'm sorry,
producidos,
we
siempre
cannot
existen
translate with this
consumidores
sound.
que están
It's
dispuestos a
impossible.
invertir y que están dispuestos a llevar una solución de conectividad. Entonces, yo creo que hay mucho para hacer desde el gobierno para facilitar estos despliegues, teniendo presente, como decía, que me parece que hoy, creo que hay ejemplos en el pasado, venía pensando, por ahí los que tenemos más años en la Argentina, Olga se debe acordar, en la década del 90, fines de la década del 90, la gran discusión era, después del fin del monopolio, cómo hacíamos para asegurar la universalidad del servicio, pensando en ese momento en comunicaciones de voz. Y escribimos ríos de tinta, discutimos, nos peleamos por las reglamentaciones, quién se iba a hacer cargo, cómo, si había cargos de acceso, si había un fondo. Y la verdad, a los pocos años, estamos hablando del año 2000, al año 2007 más o menos, el 100%, casi el 100% de los argentinos tenía una solución de voz a su disposición. ¿Qué había pasado? Bueno, la reducción de costos, algunas decisiones regulatorias como permitir el sistema Calling Party Pace y alguna política comercial de las empresas como habilitar los servicios de pagos, hicieron que en el año 2007, 2008, más o menos el 100% de los argentinos tuviera la posibilidad de hacer llamadas por teléfono y también algún mensaje corto. De alguna manera se logró cierto estándar mínimo de interpretación. Por supuesto que la tecnología avanza y pasamos a que lo que se necesitaba para eso era conectividad y lo que necesitamos es conectividad significativa. No me voy a extender ahora sobre este concepto, pero lo que quiero decir es que muchas veces creo que las soluciones no vienen de la mano de lo que pensamos los gobiernos, sino de los que piensan algunos emprendedores. Yo espero que estas nuevas tecnologías que han aflorado ahora, sumadas a algunas decisiones que conocemos y que sabemos que hay que tomar en el terreno local, hagan que, insisto, el único problema que nos quede, y que es un problema general que amerita una solución más global, que es el de la pobreza en nuestra región, haga que desaparezca rápidamente la brecha de cobertura y nos quede la brecha de acceso, donde creo que también desde el gobierno se pueden impulsar, como lo han hecho otros países, Costa Rica, Colombia, entre ellos, a Estados Unidos, a contribuir a subsidiar la demanda, que a veces es mucho más efectivo que subsidiar oferta. Bueno, estas eran algunas ideas que quería compartir con ustedes. Gracias, Diego, por la pregunta, y gracias a Olga por la invitación y al resto de los paneles.
Bueno, pues la verdad es que hemos tenido una primera ronda súper interesante donde hemos visto pues, que los
The first panel has been very
de la
interesting.
infraestructura
We have seen that
pasan porque hay
the
unas
issues of
cargas regulatorias altas. Es muy
infrastructure
importante ver aquí que tenemos a varios reguladores.
require analysis, and we
Los
have
reguladores de telecomunicaciones están preocupados por las altas cargas tributarias, pero obviamente
We're
no son
concerned because of the tax burden,
digamos, no tienen, los reguladores de telecomunicaciones no tienen autoridad para cambiar
but we have
esos
no
impuestos.
say
Pero
in
hay
changing
un tema realmente
sometimes those
interesante que
taxes.
pone Héctor sobre la mesa y
However,
que lo puso
There's
Lizana.
interesting,
Y tiene, hemos hablado de
there's
la
an interesting
oferta
topic
de
that we need to
telecomunicaciones.
propose, and that is the supply of
Pero hay una
telecommunication
gran
of product
barrera
offering.
y está al lado de la demanda. Y Lizana dice, pues para
That
aumentar
is
la demanda hay
together
que
with the
invertir en
supply.
educación.
In order to
Es
have
decir,
supply, you need to invest
uno de los
in
elementos
education.
importantes. Héctor
And that
dice,
is one of
es
the most
importante
important
por el tema
elements. Hector says
de hacer los
that it's
servicios
very
asequibles,
important
también
to have
subsidiar la demanda en
affordability of
cosa de precios. Es
services
decir, desde el lado de
and
la
to
demanda
fund
hay aquí
and to
dos
fund them.
propuestas. Una
On
es
the other, on the side of the
subsidiar,
demand,
pero la otra,
one
motivar a la
is to
gente a que lo use,
subsidize those
encuentre valor
services
a
and
través de la
to
educación.
find
Lizania,
educational
¿qué más
value in
podemos
it.
hacer para hacer que ese
Cisania, what can we do
centroamericano,
for
esa familia
people
diga,
living
yo
in Central
prefiero
America
invertirle en internet
to decide that they can
a
invest
otras
over the
cosas?
internet?
Porque le ven el valor a internet. ¿Qué más
Because
podemos hacer para aumentar esa demanda
they
de
will see
internet?
some value.
De un internet que de
How
verdad
can we increase the
sirva y que de
demand
verdad
of the
transforme la
internet
vida
that
de la
could be
gente.
useful and that could be
Perfecto, muchísimas
a
gracias, Diego, por tu
differentiating factor
interesante
for
pregunta.
people? Thank you very much, Diego.
Justamente en la misma línea de
Precisely.
incentivar la demanda, pero también
Providing
podemos pensar
incentives to
en
demand
esquemas
will
de
require
cómo permitimos que esos usuarios finales tengan
permitting
acceso a
final users
dispositivos
to
inteligentes,
have
que son
access
los
to
que
smart
permiten dar ese
devices
uso
that
productivo de
indeed
las TIC.
to be
Alguien mencionó,
to have the
creo que fue
productive
usted
use
mismo,
of
sobre las importaciones de
ITCs,
equipos,
and those are
o sea, el
product
impuesto
imports
asociado no tanto al
and
servicio,
the
también
tax related not to the
al costo
service
del
but to
equipo.
the
O sea,
cost of
¿cómo
the
hacemos
equipment
que esos
itself.
equipos inteligentes
How
sean
do we make
accesibles
these
a los usuarios
smart
finales? Eso
devices
para
to
ya
be more
proveernos de
affordable
todo el
for the final
equipamiento necesario
users,
para que
to
los
provide them
mismos
with
hagan
necessary
uso
equipment so
productivo
they
de esas
can
tecnologías. Entonces,
produce
otra
more
forma
with those
también es
technologies
mostrar cómo a través de las tecnologías
and
o del acceso a
to
Internet,
showcase
¿verdad?
how through
O sea,
internet
pueden
access and
impulsar sus
technologies
negocios a
we
través
can
del comercio
drive more business
electrónico, o
through
sea, los
electronic
emprendedores de algunas
commerce,
comunidades, cómo
like
pueden
entrepreneurs
ofertar
in a
sus
community, how
productos a
they
través
can
de las
sell
plataformas
products
digitales.
through their
También
online
podemos ver
platforms
cómo esos
and
usuarios
how these
pueden
users
justamente alfabetizarse a
indeed
través de los programas
could
online
learn through online
que
training
tienen las
programs
universidades. O sea, yo
at
siempre pongo el ejemplo que,
universities.
por ejemplo, en el caso mío, yo hice
By
una
way of an
maestría
example,
hace 10
for
años
example,
online, cuando la pandemia,
I studied
justo
online.
muchísimo antes de la pandemia. O sea, ya la
I
educación virtual existía previa a la
joined a
pandemia. Lo que
master's
pasa es que no tenía
before
ese
the
auge que tiene
pandemic,
ahora y ya no es como el modus
but
operandi habitual de todos
it's not the
nosotros.
modus
Entonces
operandi
debemos
of the
hacer
organization
conciencia de
of
ese uso
what we
productivo
usually do.
de
So
las
we
TIC,
have
de
to
todos
make
los
use
beneficios que
of
nos
the
brindan las
ICTs and the
tecnologías
benefits that
para
technology
nuestro
brings to the
crecimiento
table
profesional y
so
personal. Yo
that
creo que esa
we
es
can
otra
have a
forma también,
career and
o sea,
personal
pues,
growth.
de incentivar la demanda.
That would be
Pues
to create
sabemos que no
incentives
es
for demand.
negocio, como bien dijo
We
César,
said
a
that
los
there's
grandes
no
operadores
business
invertir en
in the
esas zonas,
carriers
pues
to
la demanda es
invest
baja.
in those
También
areas because
conocemos, como
there's
bien
low
dijo el
demand.
señor de Brasil, que ya hay
As we
servicios
know
satelitales disponibles para
that
comunidades
there are
remotas,
available
pero o
satellite
sea, si tenemos todo eso y las
services
personas no se ven
for
motivadas a
remote
utilizar las
coverage,
tecnologías, pues seguimos teniendo
but people are not
una brecha
required
de
to use the
justamente
technologies
de
if
que las
there's a
personas no
divide
acceden al servicio.
because they cannot
Entonces,
have
pues
access
es
to
más,
that service.
pues enseñarles
So first we
que
need to
todos los
train
beneficios que
these
nos trae el
people
uso de
and
las
to
TIC, que no
teach
necesariamente es usar el TikTok,
then
el
what
Instagram, el Facebook, las
benefits
redes
are
sociales,
there? It's not
sino también
teaching
todo lo
how to use
productivo que
TikTok
se puede
or
hacer a través de
social
estos
media,
medios.
but
Y
how
quizás
these media
el tema
can
del zero
become
rating facilita
productive and
a que
more
los usuarios
effective
estén conectados en algunas plataformas
and
cuando se le
facilitate
acaba el
access
paquete
to the
comprado.
map
Pero eso es una
to a
forma
certain
quizás
platform.
o sea, yo diría que hasta darle un poquito más de importancia cuando lo más necesario a veces, por ejemplo, en el caso mío, es poder
For
tener
example,
acceso
in
al
my
navegador.
case,
Entonces, como un cambio de
my
mentalidad que
need is
sí
to
las
have access
plataformas
to a
son necesarias
browser.
para pedir un
Platforms
Uber,
are too
para
necessary
cualquier
for
cosa,
requesting a
o sea,
car, an
social
Uber
también,
car,
pero ese no es el uso principal que quisiéramos
but that is
mostrarle a los
social
ciudadanos,
media.
sino
This
es
is
un
not what we
uso
intend to
que es
use to
un
the
poquito más
citizenry.
significativo, como le
There is
llamamos la
a more
conectividad
meaningful
significativa,
way
y eso es
of
justo lo que
connectivity,
quisiéramos
and that is
hacer conciencia,
precisely
motivar
what
y
we need to
enseñar a
show,
todos los usuarios
teach,
finales.
and raise
Gracias por
awareness to
la
all
palabra.
users.
Tania,
Thank you very much.
Marilana, vi que estabas reaccionando cuando estábamos hablando de que los operadores tienen una carga muy alta, ¿no? Y no quería
They
dejar
said that there's a
esa
tax burden
respuesta tuya ahí entre el
on
tintero. ¿Qué nos quieres
devices.
decir?
Sí,
What can you tell us about
cuando
that?
conversaba sobre el
Yes.
nivel de inversión por
When we talked
usuario,
about the
es
investment per
importante
user,
señalar
it is important
que el ratio
to
inversión-ventas
point
brutas de los
that
operadores de telecomunicaciones
the
en
ratio of
Latinoamérica es
gross
del
sales
23%
in Latin
del
America,
espectro.
I believe, is
Ese
23% of the
23%
spectrum
no es
level.
sostenible,
That
¿me entiendes?
23%
No es
is not
sostenible
sustainable
y
for a
eso hay que
time,
tomarlo en consideración con
and that
ARPUs
needs
muy bajos que en
to
algunos
be
países con
considered
condiciones macroeconómicas difíciles ha
in
llegado
other
el ARPU a
countries
tener un
that
valor de
have
$2
crisis that
versus casi
cost
30
probably
dólares, perdón,
$10
reducido la verdad.
against another service
Versus más de
that
30
is offered
dólares
at
en
$30
países desarrollados y no
in
digamos
developed
Estados
countries,
Unidos, que es mucho más.
not the United
Entonces,
States that is
creo que
even
hay
more
que poner en
expensive.
valor las inversiones que se
So
han
we
hecho, que
need to
incluso llegan
estimate
a
the
78
investments that
mil
were
millones
made.
de
Some of
inversión
them
entre el 18 y
account
el 21.
for
Y eso ha permitido llegar a estos
$78
niveles de
billion,
conectividad, pero es
and this
cierto,
allows us
tenemos una
to
frontera y
reach
esa
higher
frontera
levels of
debe
connectivity,
ser
but
acometida
we have a cap,
por programas de diferente
and that
índole
needs to be
y con el
overcome
apoyo de
with
dinero
programs and
público.
initiatives of
Tal es el
different
caso
kinds and with
de
investment. Such is the case of
por ejemplo, las redes australes chilenas que se
the
lanzaron
Austrian
redes con
Chilean
dinero
networks
del Estado
that
hacia la parte
require
más
high
austral de Chile, pero
investment
entonces se
in
encontraban ante
the
la
southern
problemática de
tip of
cómo
Chile.
capilarizar esas redes.
But, you
Cómo
know,
efectivamente a partir de
they
esos
said, okay,
troncales
how can
derivar
we make these
hacia,
networks more profitable
hacia hogares
and
casados y
to
hogares
retoward
conectados.
them to
Y
connected
ahí Chile a su
households?
vez tiene ahora
And
un
Chile
programa que le
has a
entrega
program
recursos a las
provides
regiones,
resources to other
en
regions
este nuevo esfuerzo de
in this new
de
effort that
llevar
they're making of
recursos y
taking
además delegación de
resources to other
funciones hacia
people
las regiones
to
y
that
ha
region
asignado recursos
and has
en esta
allocated
línea
the
donde la
necessary
región
resources
Ñuble
along the
es
lines
la región que ha
where
liderado este proceso,
the
ya tiene
Chilean
recursos asignados y
region
además de
has
ellos los
these
está
resources
ubicando
allocated and they're
principalmente en las
positioning
áreas de
themselves
educación y salud.
in education
Creo
and health.
también, si vemos los
I believe that if
grandes
we
avances, como
see
este caso que
progress
nos hablaban
made
del norte conectado
or large
brasileiro, esto es
strides in the
muy,
northern
muy,
part
muy
of Brazil,
relevante.
this becomes
Que dicho sea de
relevant,
paso, esta etapa actual de esas
this current
infovías
situation of these
fueron
5
parte de las obligaciones de la
ways
licitación
were
5G
part
que muy
of
bien
the
planteó
5G bid
Anatel en Brasil. Entonces
that was
creo que,
proposed by
como
Anatel
decíamos
in
al
Brazil.
inicio, esta
So at
conjunción de
first,
elementos
we say
hacen
this
que
convergence of elements
efectivamente no solo nos permita
make us not
privilegiar
only to place
subsidio a la
priority
demanda, que nos
upon
hablaba el subsecretario,
subsidies,
sino también
and also
extender esas troncales,
extend
extender
the
esa
trunk lines
conectividad
and
que
connectivity
definitivamente no solo permite una
that
conectividad
eventually will allow
más,
further
de más alta
connectivity
velocidad, sino
of
también
high-speed
unir pueblos
internet
que de otra
access
forma
and to
no
unite
se hubiera
communities
podido hacer.
that
Y
were
así se
disregarded
abricen
in the
muchos
past.
fondos en el mundo dedicados a extender conectividad
And that's
y ahora
how
a
the rest of the
subsidiar
world has
demandas. Como se
extended
señalaba, Costa
connectivity and
Rica tiene un programa
subsidizing
muy
demand. Costa
interesante en
Rica has a
esto,
very interesting
sobre todo
program
para
for
mujeres
this purpose, especially for
que
women
son el principal ingreso de la familia,
that
que se llama
are
Hogares Conectados, homónimo con el
the
que se
ones
tenía en
that
Colombia en su
support
época, ministro, si usted recuerda,
their own families.
es ahora muy relevante,
Well,
o sea,
this program
conecta y
has
conectó
become
durante la
relevant
pandemia a una
because
cantidad
it
importante de
connects
estudiantes. Y
many
asimismo,
students.
otros esfuerzos como en República Dominicana,
Another
Canasta
efforts,
Digital, que
like
también es un
in the
subsidio
Dominican
orientado
Republic,
a la demanda,
are subsidies
también
geared
con
towards
los
demand
temas de género incluidos
with
como drivers
gender-based
de búsqueda
equality
para estas familias.
and
Estos procesos
diversity
de subsidio a la
for
demanda
these
tienen que estar
families.
muy
This
bien
demand
diseñados,
subsidy has to be
claramente, tienen que
very
estar
well
bien
structured,
diseñados,
very
tienen
well
que tener
devised.
data
They
de
should have
las
supporting
instituciones
data
que
of those
manejan
institutions that manage
pobreza en cada uno de los países,
poverty
asimismo
in
bien enfocados
each of
y
the
sobre
countries,
todo tener claro que estos subsidios
very well
deben
structured,
identificar
and
el
knowing full
principio
well
y
that
también una
subsidies
condición de salida del subsidio, en qué momento vamos a dejar que las
should be
familias
assessed and
tomen
how
parte de esa responsabilidad.
families
Tal
are
es
going
el caso
to be
costarricense,
responsible
donde un
for
porcentaje
eventually
del
paying
costo de
and
la
not being
conectividad
subsidized.
bajo y dependiendo de los
So
niveles
knowing
de los
full well
sentidos de
that you have
ingreso,
low connectivity and
quedan
depending on
bajo
the income of
responsabilidad
people,
de la familia.
basically
Entonces, ahí hay un
families will be
elemento
responsible
de
for
vital
that.
importancia
So
porque
there's a vital
también,
importance,
como
a
sabemos,
vital
los
important
subsidios tienen que
element
ser
because you know the
muy bien
subsidies
estructurados. Pero al
need
final,
to be well
si vemos
structured.
los números
Eventually, if
nos
we analyze the
hablan solitos,
statistics,
¿verdad? 190 millones de
statistics
personas
speak for
con
themselves.
cobertura y sin
190 million
uso
people
del servicio.
with no
Pero si
coverage and
además
without
tomamos
using
en
the
cuenta
service.
a
However,
los
if we
satélites de
consider
baja, media y alta órbita,
high,
prácticamente
low,
diríamos
and income,
estamos totalmente
high,
cubiertos,
low, and middle
solo
income
que
will
las
be
familias necesitan
covered
ayuda
by
para poder
families or
acceder a estos
households
servicios.
need subsidies to
Nilo,
have
estamos
access
llegando a ese punto en el
or
que
to afford these
efectivamente la
services.
gente tiene cobertura, las redes llegan a la
Nilo,
puerta de su casa,
people
pero
have
la gente
coverage.
no se conecta.
We have the service that is passing
Porque no
by
tiene
the
dinero
front door,
o
but
porque no
people
tiene
cannot
interés.
connect themselves. Is it because they
Comentabas
cannot
aquí
afford it or because they are not interested
el
in
Estado
being
ayuda, el
connected?
Estado ayuda con inversiones como las que vimos en
Because the
Brasil.
state
¿De qué
provided
otra forma el Estado puede ayudar a
necessary
incentivar esa demanda?
investments and incentives. What other incentives can be provided by the state?
Eu acho que, bom, o problema é de vários sentidos, né? A gente tem problema
I think that the
de
problem
infraestrutura, de dispositivos,
has to do with infrastructure, with
interesse de uso.
devices,
Esse
and with
ponto que
people's
você
interests in
bem
the
colocou, né?
subject.
Então, a Anatel diretamente tenta atacar
Now,
muito a
Anatel
questão
is
da
dealing
inexistência de
mostly with the issue of
infraestrutura. A gente faz
infrastructure, or the
um
lack
edital
of
de
it.
licitação, é o que a gente
We
conseguiu
issue
fazer no último leilão do
tenders.
5G, inclusive.
We
Boa
try to be
parte
as inclusive
do
as
programa Norte
possible.
Conectado está sendo pago pelos
Much of
recursos desse
our
leilão, inclusive, né?
connectivity
Isso foi muito
program
bem
is also about training
falado aí
courses so
pelo
that
William, mas
we can make the process as
a
transparent
gente
as
tem ali
possible.
investimentos que vão
Our investments
fazer todo o display de 5G pelo Brasil.
are aimed
Mais de
at
6.000
getting
localidades,
5G
então
coverage
o
throughout the north of
4G vai ser
Brazil,
expandido para áreas rurais em mais
and
de
we're also
8.000
trying to get
localidades pelo Brasil.
4G
Tudo
in
isso
another
e,
8,000
bom, o serviço de
localities
transporte não
in
pode ser
Brazil.
pode
And
deixar de lado, né? Principalmente
so
as
we
questões de
think
fibra
that
ótica,
the fiber optics is
né? Como já
obviously a
foi
good
mencionado, a gente pode ter
solution,
cobertura satelital, em tese todas
as
estão
would
cobertas,
be satellite coverage.
né? No Brasil não é diferente, a gente tem
In
muita capacidade
Brazil,
satelital, mas isso não quer dizer que
we
está
have
acessível para
good
todos.
satellite
Então,
coverage on the
chegando à
whole.
infraestrutura, o
But
que a
I
gente
think that
percebe é
the
uma
issue with
necessidade
infrastructure
para uma
is that
parcela da
people need to
população
perceive the real need
de
for it.
preços menores, e
And
esses preços
prices
menores
need to
não
come down.
significa forçar os
And doesn't
operadores a
mean
cobrar menos, né?
obliging
Isso é um modelo
operators to charge less for their
insustentável, né, de longo
services.
prazo.
I mean, it's got to be
Significa
sustainable,
o Estado
but it means that the
colocando uma
state
parcela
should put
dessa
up
remuneração na
part
prestação
of
de serviço.
the money
E
to
você pode
pay
ter
for
N
the provision of
modelos
services.
de como fazer isso na
And now
prática,
there
né?
are different
Existem
models of how to
exemplos
do this
pelo
in the
mundo de como
practice.
fazer.
There are different ways of doing
Mas
this.
mesmo assim, mesmo
But
existindo
even
subsídio, existindo uma estrutura, você ainda vai ter uma parcela
within this situation,
desinteressada
there will be a
de
part
conectar.
that is just simply not interested in connectivity, in being connected. Most people, I mean, like us, you know, we can't imagine life without connectivity. But for some, it might seem strange to know that there are people who find absolutely no use in connectivity or access to internet. And it's strange because the last research that we did, it was a house-to-house survey carried out by our Internet Management Committee, and it showed that a part of the cost of the service wasn't actually the main motive for a lack of connection. It was simply that people didn't see any use in the service. And that's when we access a much more of an abstract area. And we have less room for maneuver there because this has to do with education, which has been extensively discussed by my colleagues. People don't understand how to use technology. It's quite different just using social networks. Technology can be used for so many aspects to make life easier, like banking, how to market products that you make, how to connect with the communities that are making different products, and you know, you can just look at this as economic support or marketing support. So internet can help with all of that, but that's a degree of understanding which we realize that we have to tackle. And it has so much to do with education at school level, where children understand since it's an element, it's a factor that helps a lot, for instance, in the area of e-government, because you have so many state services which are online, which are designed to make people's lives easier. These are services which traditionally required people to go and wait in line for at an office, whether it had to do with getting their rights respected or getting subsidies. Sometimes it could take days for these processes to get dealt with. And the government has put all of this online. It's made life an awful lot easier for people. And it's not just you know, if you think about things for the people living in the Amazon, it would take days and days for them to go to an office and days for them to return home, just to deal with one specific issues. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we've come a long way in the last 3 or 4 years in terms of digital government, and it's grown, and there are now many more services available online which enable people to resolve different things, and also at municipal level. And I think this helps a lot in educational terms for people to understand why connectivity is so important. One of the great transformative elements that I think that this has to offer. Well, to wind up, Cesar. We need another kind of digital infrastructure, don't we? Like data centers, CDNs. Systems which can improve the quality of the transmission and storage of data. How we're doing in Latin America. This is another kind of infrastructure that we're talking about, not necessarily to do with connectivity. I think it's a 360-degree solution. It's not just about data centers and their infrastructure, but also part of the content generated within the region. And this is important when it comes to stimulating demand, not just in outlying areas, but also in urban centers and more densely populated areas. There is a great deal of content which is being developed in the region, which isn't being made the most of on the networks or even on internet. For example, there are some Central American countries which speak certain dialects, and they have linguistic differentiation which has to do with their native tongues, and there isn't enough content to stimulate them to realize that they have new solutions that could meet their demand. If we talk about how many servers are connected in the region, it's very well, but we're not actually helping to solve the problem of connectivity of those who aren't connected. And then there's something else that we need to talk about, which is regulatory activities which hinder growth, because the regulations are don't allow internet to grow. They don't allow it to be open or stable. So there are many parliamentary initiatives throughout the region. And it's as simple as saying that the politicians or the parliamentarians just need to sit down and define a program. For instance, the Connected program. We're going to oblige the internet service providers to provide services in a specific area. But they often don't have the bigger picture, and this obscures the fact that we have other digital gaps, such as the lack of education or the scope of different services or how they're used. Now, we've held a lot of conversations, particularly last year. We've been talking about the development of submarine fiber optics to connect different cities along the coast. This year, we've been talking about technology, satellite technology, to connect those who aren't connected. So it's a little bit like a Lego structure, really. You start putting these pieces together, and as you do that, you start building something. Because the idea is that everybody has access to affordable, open, transparent internet. We all want internet to grow. 15 years ago, it didn't have the same meaning and importance and significance it does today. And most citizens today enjoy these services and depend on internet. So we need to work very closely with all sectors, from the government sectors, private sector, civil society. We need to find measures which are fair and appropriate to be able to permit internet to grow. I think we're running out of time here, but perhaps we can take some questions from the floor. I can see 5 hands raised, and there are also some online questions. Right, our online students. I have a question. What negative impacts would making the most of the migration to 5G, can we use existing infrastructure for internet to the areas which don't have internet? That's the first question. And the second question is, what regulatory initiatives are being developed in the region which can be leveraged to make the most of attempts to reach areas where there are economic difficulties? Right, another question. I'm going to speak in Portuguese. I wanted to ask Josias, connectivity in the Amazon, like when we're talking about Starlink, how does it work in the Amazon? And would the federal government be funding this? And would this also be used in schools? And what position would you give Starlink within this in the outlook for the digital growth, which we've been talking about today? We had an event a short while back where we were hearing from somebody from Starlink and a representative from the Brazilian government. And I'd like to understand how this works. Who's going to pay for Starlink in the Amazon? How are they going to make it accessible and affordable, particularly for vulnerable communities? Because it's really expensive. Okay, then we have 3 questions there. You can speak Portuguese if you want. About Starlink, this question of digital sovereignty is incredibly important. And my answer, I remember this discussion is one that we had in Brazil last week, as a month ago, about internet. And the answer about Starlink is this. People are using technology because they have no other option in the national market, and because there are no options. Yeah, we're not seeing any options because there is no infrastructure. And it's a really complex issue to reach the Amazon with internet. The antennas cost 2,500 reales, and the service would cost 200 or 300 reales. In dollars, the antenna is about $60 a month. Okay, so you buy the antenna at $600, and then you have to pay $60 a month to maintain it. The government is using it for the police, for schools, federal police. All of these different services are using it. So, but the general population needs to be able to access it. So I've been talking about this recently, and there were two people from native populations, and they said, we have a community radio. And now we finally managed to get someone with Starlink. We've managed to get the people who are sick in our community to get seen to in 24 hours because of connectivity and internet. That internet isn't just about connectivity. It's not about technology. It's about digital inclusion, social inclusion. So when you go to these indigenous communities which are so remote, when you reach them with connectivity, we're not just talking about changing the lives of these people in a negative sense. We are paying a technical debt that we have with all of these communities. So we have in the Amazon, which is incredibly important. We have free internet and Wi-Fi in 66 different localities in Amazonas, in Accra and Roraima and the Amazon. Provide satellite services in places which had absolutely no kind of connectivity at all. And they can access Wi-Fi to exchange text messages using text applications. And some of these units which we're using, like Starlink, which is the big topic of the moment, I just want to finish this point here. Before we had Starlink, we had something called Rus, which is also satellite technology, with a tiny difference. Starlink is 10 times faster than what we had before. So it's not just a question of being able to exchange text messages, but people can access streaming and videos. You hear anybody talking about what they do in South America, and we have to look things a bit more deeply. Internet just has so much to offer, and the impact that it can have is vast. Thank you. I don't know if anybody else wants to answer a question. Danilo. Well, we're talking about Starlink, because it's the topic of the it is a hot topic. We've been using satellites for decades. We have stationary satellites, which are much further away. And naturally, there are certain delays, as you can imagine, particularly when you use certain kinds of apps. And traditionally, obviously, it's a lot more expensive because the structure is more expensive. But what's the difference now? Starlink is a constellation of satellites. It's a new way of providing a service using satellite servicing. Starlink just got there first, but it's not the only one. There are a whole bunch of other constellations of satellites moving around the world, but simply we don't have the authorizations yet. Starlink has the authorization to provide services. It's authorized, and it provides these services, and it's exponential. And it's got all the regulatory stuff behind it as well. People are using Starlink because it's here. It got here first. So it's natural for everybody to be talking about it now. But there is going to be another system up before the end of the year in the Amazon. We're expecting other to come into play. So there's going to be some competition for Starlink. And I think that the fact that we have a regulatory environment which encourages competition is very positive. What's interesting for us, for users, is to have the options. You can imagine somebody from upcountry which doesn't have any options in a practical sense. And everything's really expensive in terms of traditional options. He is going to be able to choose from more than one supplier, and they're going to compete with the prices. We might have a clearer picture of what the options are by the end of the year, but it's not going to be just Starlink. It's going to be other operators. Because at the moment, Starlink is in a very enviable position, but that's not going to last forever. So I think that it's just the hot topic of the moment, but the market is open there for other companies to compete. It's not going to be the only one by any means. There are going to be other companies. And this is also going to propel the market forward, and there are going to be new developments. And I think it's very interesting that we're going to be looking at new satellite constellations as well.
Hay dos preguntas todavía sobre la mesa. No sé si hay que tomarlas. Una tiene que ver con la transición de 4G
as we were talking, it's a question of moving from 4G to 5G. And we're also talking about good practices. I don't know if Cesar, you have anything to say about this, about good practices?
Podría mencionar algunas prácticas regulatorias interesantes, como es el caso del Ministerio de Transportes y Comunicación del Perú, donde a través de una modificación a la normativa determinó que los operadores móviles pueden dedicar hasta el 60% del pago recurrente por espectro para el desarrollo de telecomunicaciones en zonas rurales.
Telecommunications in the rural sector
Esto ha
that
sido
are
muy
without any
exitoso
coverage.
y
This
creo
model
que
has been successful,
bueno, a este momento ya hay
and I believe so far they
665
have
localidades
665
beneficiadas con el
localities
mecanismo,
that have
pero
benefited
creo
through
que la
this business
principal
model. And I
ventaja
believe that the main
es que
advantage
el Ministerio
that they
ideó una
have
forma
is that the ministry
sencilla
came up
de
with a very
convertir
simple way of
ese monto
converting
de pago por espectro
these
a
payment
obligaciones
of
y también
spectrum
una forma
and
sencilla
allocated
de
that
recibir
to
las
further
obras una
investments
vez desarrolladas en esa localidad. Creo
and
que la
supervise the public
simplicidad,
works
y no
once
por
they
eso
are
significa
deployed
que
in the
hay falta de
locality.
control, sino
So
que
the
lo que
simplicity,
hace
and it's
es
not lack of control because
facilitar el
what
desarrollo.
they do is they facilitate development.
Otro ejemplo
Another
interesante también
interesting example
es el caso,
is the case
un nuevo proyecto que
of a new
tiene Internet
project
para Todos en el Perú,
that
que
is
también
Internet
fue
for All
habilitado a
in
través de
Peru that was
una
facilitated
modificación regulatoria
by
que habilitó
a regulatory
un
amendment
operador mayorista rural.
by
Ahora tienen un programa de alianzas que se
a
llama
wholesaler
Juntos Conectamos,
in the rural
con
sector
actores
that
de
is called A
diferentes
Punto
sectores,
Conectamos
de
with
otros sectores de la economía.
stakeholders
Particularmente
from
puedo
other parts of the
mencionar el sector
economy,
minero, que
like
allá hay varias alianzas,
the mining
donde
sector, that they have different
este
partnerships
otro agente de
where
un sector productivo distinto
these
apoya
stakeholders
el
from a
desarrollo
different
de
sector, business
infraestructura
sector, supports
precisamente
the
para
public works
conectar
or
a
infrastructure
la región donde
development to
tiene
connect
su,
the region where they
su acción
hold their own
productiva, digamos así,
operations
o su producción. Entonces,
or
con
production.
ello se ayuda a la
So
comunidad, también se
they
ayuda a la
help
empresa minera en este
the
caso,
community
que es el caso de
and
Perú
in turn the
Anglo
mining
se llama
company.
la minera, en la zona de
It's a mining
Quellaveco,
company
en
located
Perú.
in
Y
Quellaveco in
entonces ahí
Peru.
lo que se genera es una
So
alianza de
they
múltiples,
have a
no solo la alianza que
synergistic
dio origen a Internet para Todos, que
partnership.
ya por ser de
It's
múltiples
not
partes,
only the
sino también
multi-stakeholder
alianzas
partnership, but
hacia
also
otros sectores
partnerships
de la economía
with
que
other
insistimos nosotros es
sectors of the
una de
economy
las claves
that
para
are
el cierre
key
efectivo de la brecha digital.
to close the digital
Muchas
divide.
gracias. Para terminar, César o
Thank you very
Lisania,
much.
¿algún comentario sobre estas
Cesar,
preguntas?
Lisania, any other comments?
Bueno, adelante, Lisania, adelante.
Lisania?
Sí, lo que pasa es que no escuché bien la pregunta sobre las buenas prácticas
It's on
regulatorias,
the
o sea, en torno a qué. Pero
good practices
básicamente,
and the regulatory
me
framework,
imagino
right?
cerrar la brecha o
Sí,
To
dije
para
algo
close the
distinto.
divide, to
para
close the
cerrar la
digital
brecha.
divide. Okay,
Correcto.
good.
Tenemos también, que es algo que nosotros desde Compeca siempre replicamos, y es el caso Colombia. Todo el tema del
In
sandbox regulatorio,
Condensna,
que
we
también
have
ya
the
República
regulatory
Dominicana,
framework
para los que no
for
lo saben,
Colombia,
pues
and
también
we
ya
have the
República
regulatory
Dominicana,
framework
para los que no
for
lo saben,
Colombia,
pues
and
también
in
aperturó
Dominican
un
Republic,
plazo
we
para
also
las
extended
empresas pues presentar sus ofertas.
terms for
Pues
the time
este
frame
sandbox
where
nos permite
these
justamente a las empresas ensayar
companies
tecnologías
can
que pueden incidir
bid
en las nuevas
in
formas
public
de
tenders.
brindar el servicio de acceso a
This
las telecomunicaciones
basically give
previamente, o sea, sin
flexibility
tener
to
que
provide
pasar todas
services
esas quizás
without
algunas
going
barreras
through
legales que para
the
muchos
typical
entrantes
legal red
muchas
tape, especially
entidades
for the
lo
new
llaman como barreras,
entrants
pero quizás
or
yo lo
agencies, they
llamaría
see
requisitos
this as
regulatorios y
barriers.
poder pues
But I
ensayar esas
call
nuevas
them
tecnologías previo como
regulatory
al lanzamiento al mercado.
requirements.
También
But probably
tenemos
they
el
can
caso
do
de
that
Panamá,
before
que
entering the
está
market. In the case
incursionando
of
en el tema de
Panama,
modernización
they are
de
embarking
su
upon the
ley, de su marco
modernization
legal regulatorio en
of the
temas de
legal
telecomunicaciones.
regulatory
Pues
framework
sabemos
in
que son ahora
telecommunications.
mismo las leyes de
Nowadays,
telecomunicaciones
The telecommunication framework covers telephone services. Nobody mentions internet, or they don't cover even the internet resources allowing access to internet. That includes IP addresses and the domain name server. That even is not included in the regulatory framework, but that provide connectivity services. So it's more or less the work reviewing the regulatory framework because they have become obsolete. So we can make the necessary changes and to speak the same language that is required by the digital transformation. I believe these three cases or pillars are what we're doing. And we have prepared a report on streamlining processes on the deployment of infrastructure. That means, what are the legal barriers in order to deploy different structures? And here you have the municipality rules and all of that. Together with Mariliana and the MEA, we will talk to the municipalities. CONEA has prepared a report, and evidently we require a common shared framework, because if not, we have the same obstacles in other municipalities to set up antennas. And this differs from one municipality to the other in the same country. So we want a single window of opportunity and a comprehensive shared legal framework having the same tariffs and the same requirements, something that requires or aiming at consistency. So this is basically what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Diego, 30 segundos.
Diego,
30
30
segundos,
seconds.
rápido. En la región hay una
In the
infinidad
region,
de
we
ejemplos
have
de buenas
endless
prácticas. Bien lo dijo
events
Mariliana,
aiming at
en Perú hay
best
algunos que
practices,
nosotros
like in
hemos dado
Peru.
seguimiento. En la
In
región,
Peru,
por
we
ejemplo,
did some follow-up
Centroamérica, justo como
in Central
identifica
America,
Contelca ha
like
promovido algunas cosas,
Contelca,
pero para nosotros
that
lo
has
importante
promoted
no es ni
different
siquiera
workshops or
esto,
conferences.
la
But for us,
tecnología, justo
it's
como
not
por ejemplo algo
technology
implementada de
itself,
4G a 5G,
like
porque para el
4G or
cliente
5G.
o para el
For the
usuario
client
dentro de
or
estas
for the
regiones la
final
tecnología
user
es
in these
transparente,
regions,
es decir,
technology
a
becomes
él no le
transparent
interesa si está
already,
conectado en 4G,
regardless whether
en
they're
5G,
connected to
o si está
4G,
conectado por un
5G,
libre router
or
con una red de
by
Wi-Fi. Lo
merely
importante es
the
que
Wi-Fi
este usuario,
router.
este ciudadano esté
The important
conectado
thing is
y
that
hacia
they
eso
are
es donde
connected,
todos
and
nosotros
this is
debemos
where
apuntar.
we are
30 segundos.
getting towards.
Muchas
Thank
gracias.
you.
Bueno, yo creo que ya estamos súper pasados de
Thank you very
tiempo.
much. I think
Olga,
that
Néstor, muchas gracias por
in
la
order
invitación. Muchas
to
gracias a
take
todos
to the
nuestros
agenda, we're going to
panelistas.
conclude. Thank you
Porque
very much for
tocamos todos los temas
to all the
críticos
panelists. I think we have
en
touched upon
infraestructura.
the most
Muchas
critical
gracias a
issues on
todos por
infrastructure. Thank you
la
very much
audiencia.
for
Muchas gracias.
participating in this conference.
Gracias a todos. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you. Greetings from Buenos Aires. I think Hector had problems with his connectivity, but I would like to thank him for being in the panel. Thank you very much, and hopefully I'll see you. Looking forward to seeing you in the future. Greetings from Oscar and from Andrea. Thank you very much. Looking forward. Thank you very much, and a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you. Okay. I think this is going to be bilingual, Portuguese and Spanish in the SSIG, because we speak both languages. This is a sister country, sister nation, so we need to learn Portuguese anyways. Thank you very much. We will resume the session tomorrow. I'm sorry, but we had to stick to the agenda. We couldn't extend it. So we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and I will call the attendance. I'll call the roll. So apart from being here at 8:30, we have two important panels. The director of the Council of Europe is going to join us. He was here last year. He took many questions, and we have allocated a lot of time to his presentation. Patrick Pennick is going to address his presentation in English, and he's going to be talking about the Budapest Convention and the many covenants and conventions on privacy in the European Council, and they have one more Convention on Artificial Intelligence. As you know, the OECD and the European Union had a lot of impact in these frameworks with the Budapest Convention. So I'm sure that it's going to be very interesting. And then we have Glenn Bainsley, that was one of the most important consultants on cybersecurity to Obama. It's going to tell us about the private international organizations or programs in cybercrime and cybersecurity. They're going to be addressing their presentations in English, but we have the translation. Thank you very much.